G'day, mate. 40 here. I obviously don't have any expertise with regard to war or with regard to Iran, but I can spot patterns, and I can, right, at least I can see through the BS. So that's the basis for this live stream. And I'm going to get to it in my typical roundabout circular way. We had the Oscars last night. I didn't watch them. I'm a straight man, so I wouldn't watch the Oscars unless some beautiful woman wanted me to watch the Oscars with her. And I've seen some of the 2025 films, and I'm not passionate about any of them. So my primary criteria for a movie or a novel is, does it keep my attention? And so there were 3, at least, 2025 films that kept my attention. Right, The Secret Agent kept my attention. Didn't love it, but kept my attention. Mighty Supreme kept my attention, didn't love it. Sovereign, didn't love it, but it cut me. And then One Battle After Another, which I guess was the best picture, it kept my attention. So I thought it was a fine film, kept my attention, but it didn't really move me. But Sovereign cut me the most deeply because I recognized in the father and son characters, right, these sovereign citizens, right, my own proclivity for thinking that I'm smarter than everyone else. And that can lead to social isolation, or it's a result of social isolation, so I have to layer on some belief to make myself feel good despite my failures. And it's like, oh, okay, even though I'm failing, at least I see through the BS. And I also recognize in this movie my own proclivity for buying into conspiracy theories, because then I can tell myself, at least I see through the BS, right? I see the secret truths, the hard truths, the magic keys that everyone else is oblivious to because they're just about what's comfortable. And I also recognize in these characters, particularly the father figure, my own proclivity for very confident pronouncements about all sorts of things I don't know much about. It's a family trait. It's not something that's just unique to me. I remember in my 2nd grade report card, the teacher wrote, Luke is always very eager to share his opinion with the class, but he needs to learn to be more considerate of the slower thinker. And then I arrive in California in 1977. California is much more psychologically sophisticated than Australia. And people started calling me insecure. And I was obviously insecure. And what screamed insecurity was my attention-seeking showboating. And I would talk a lot in class. I would get into arguments. And I remember my classmates in 7th grade started teasing me. And I got upset. I was like on the verge of tears, and I walked out of the classroom because I couldn't handle it. And I just yelled out, shut up. And the teacher said to my classmates, apparently, why are you guys upsetting Luke? Why are you teasing him so hard? And they pointed out, well, he's always teasing us. So I could dish it out, but I couldn't take it. Then I took a media class when I entered public school for the first time in 10th grade, Placer High School. And many years later, someone who was in the class with me said, oh, we didn't know what to do with his brain. And that swelled my ego when I heard about that remark. But what she was touching on was that I was very confrontational, very domineering, dominating, provocative, attention-seeking, showboating. And I was another classmate or friend from high school and a classmate for 1 year remembers me as this arrogant turd who was always sure he was right, even though he was very passionate about stuff that it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And so these 2 sovereign citizens, just absolutely convinced of their own righteousness, convinced that they see through the BS, and it leads in a very destructive manner. So those are the warnings that I'm bringing into this analysis. I don't have a strong opinion on whether this Iran war is a good idea or a bad idea. I am emotionally on the side of the United States. I am emotionally opposed to the Islamist regime of Iran. I came to America in 1977, and one of my earliest, most intense memories is of the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 bleeding into 1980. So, yeah, I've got quite a bit of hostility towards Iran's regime, but that doesn't mean necessarily that this kind of war is the best way for America to pursue its interests. Here's an excerpt from the Call Me Back podcast hosted by Dan Senor, and the speaker here is Nadav Eyal, And then later we'll also hear from Amit Segal.
That are changing the face of this war. This war has begun with being framed around the Iranian regime and the abilities by the Iranian regime and trying to degrade them, taking them out. We're going to discuss this. But right now it has become a war also, maybe mainly, about energy and the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the oil in the world flows through Hormuz. Right now, it's not only that the strait is closed, it's not really closed. It's just open only for Iranian or Russian oil tankers that are approved by Tehran. Tehran right now is producing, according to the Wall Street Journal, more oil per day than it produced before the war, while the countries in the region cannot export oil anymore. And we have just seen India, for instance, turning to Tehran and getting clearance from Tehran to get 2 tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a substantial issue, Dan, because if you need to continue on degrading the power of the Iranian regime and the Strait of Hormuz remains, again, not closed, but just open to whatever the Iranians want. But at the end of the day, this limits the ability of this war, or might limit the ability of this war to continue. There have been substantial developments in this sense. There is the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia. There are attempts by the United States to either open the strait or to find sort of hacks.
No, I'm not an Iran expert, and here comes my confident pronouncement. There is no way that the Trump administration did not consider that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. That doesn't mean that their plan is going to be successful, right? But there's no way they didn't think about this. So it's been a reigning media cliche for the past week that the Trump administration didn't consider it, didn't take into account, didn't have a strategy or a plan for dealing with Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. That just makes absolutely no sense. And I got a magic key for decoding this war. It's one particular YouTube channel, and it's called Navy Decoded. It's not a big channel. It's only got about 68,000 subscribers. But I ran the transcripts from its latest videos by Gemini, and Gemini found these videos highly credible. So this has helped me understand
100 ballistic missiles, more than 700 drones, every launcher active, every magazine emptied. That was Iran at full escalation, maximum output. Everything the regime had built over 40 years, fired in a single day. 10 days later, 40 missiles, 60 drones, a reduction of more than 90%. And it was not because Iran chose restraint. The supreme leader is still calling for total war. The IRGC commander is still threatening the heart of American forces. The rhetoric has not declined by a single decibel. Only the weapons have. The pundits are not talking about this number. They are talking about 3 cargo ships hit near the Strait.
So the following point seems incredibly important. The following point is that Iran's capacity to create and build munitions has been destroyed. So to me, that matters, and that's probably the most important variable.
Strait of Hormuz, a Thai bulk carrier burning, a Japanese container vessel tagged, a Marshall Islands tanker struck. The IRGC declared the strait closed. Iranian state media ran the footage on.
So I don't know much, but I do know one thing, and that is that there's almost no correlation between what's important and what dominates the news. And so these ships who got bombed by Iran, right, this is dominating the news. But I agree with this video. I don't think this is particularly important.
On repeat. And every military channel on this platform made the same video. Iran strikes back. They are looking at the wrong score.
Right. These are not our ships. These are not our allies' ships. Right. These are the ships of people who are not our allies. And for our own interests and for getting clarity with regard to who's winning this Iran war, the destruction of these ships, I don't think has the importance that the news is giving it.
Scoreboard. 3 ships hit with weapons Iran cannot replace. Meanwhile, CENTCOM has struck over 5,500 targets inside Iran, over 60 warships destroyed. The entire Soleimani-class corvette squadron erased from the order of battle. 16 mine-laying vessels sunk. And last night, a ballistic missile manufacturing facility leveled by the bomber force. Everyone is asking the wrong question. How do we stop the fast boats? How do we protect the tankers? How do we clear the mines? Those are tactical questions, and tactical questions are for pundits who have never read an engineering textbook.
I think this video is 100% correct. I think this is an important point, and it's not a point that's getting much play in the news.
Engineers ask something different.
So initially, when I ran these videos by AI, it said low credibility. And something I've noticed when I talk to AI, and I've expanded my AI subscriptions, they're now over $100 a month. Grok, I think I pay $35 a month. Gemini, $20 a month. ChatGPT, $20 a month. And now I've added Claude for another $20 a month. And I've noticed almost every time I initiate a conversation about this Iran war, the chatbot comes back to me and says, Operation Epic Fury is fictional. It doesn't really exist. Right? There's no war currently with Iran. Then I have to push back and say, are you insane? And then when I force the AI to get up to date with the news, then it comes back to me with very different answers. So you could hear this anecdote and conclude, oh, AI is useless, AI is stupid. No, AI, like almost everything else, is what you make of it. You can use AI in an informative and productive way, or you can be an idiot.
Engineers ask, where did those weapons come from? Who built them? And is that factory still standing? The answer:
that is what matters. Is the factory that built these particular Iranian weapons still standing? That's what counts, and I don't believe it is still standing.
Is rubble. If that answer matters to you, if you would rather understand the war than just watch it, subscribe to Navy Decoded.
So this is a patriotic American channel, but that doesn't mean that its analysis is wrong.
Type proud in the comments. This is not a war of fast boats and
being proud of your military, being proud of your nation is not maladaptive. It's usually adaptive. It's usually a really good thing to feel because pride feels great. Right? You're going to be more capable. You're going to be happier. You're going to be more effective in life if you feel pride in yourself, your people, your community, your family, your profession, and your nation and your nation's military, particularly when your nation is at war.
Burning tankers. This is a war between consumption and production, and that war has already been decided. There are two wars happening right now. The one the cameras show you, and the one that actually matters. The war on camera is spectacular. IRGC fastboats swarming commercial shipping. Shah HED drones buzzing across the Gulf. Tankers burning in the Strait. The pundits debate whether Iran can close Hormuz. They replay the footage of the Miyuri Nari on fire and ask, is Iran winning? The real war has no footage, no explosions on screen, no smoke rising over water. The real war is a spreadsheet, a cold industrial ledger comparing two numbers. How fast Iran is consuming its weapons versus how fast Iran can produce replacements. When the first number exceeds the second, the war is already over. Everything after that is just the clock running out. Iran is not stupid. They understood asymmetric warfare before anyone taught it in an American war college. A 50,000...
So the clock is definitely running out, right? The bell is tolling. For whom does the bell toll? So given the disparity in resources, right, there's a good argument to be made that the clock is tolling primarily for Iran. On the other hand, Iran is fighting on its home turf, so all the Iranian regime needs to do is survive, just like in the American Revolutionary War. All George Washington needed to do was to keep his army intact and around and alive, and eventually America was going to win.
$1 fast boat against a $2 billion destroyer. That exchange ratio wins every time at the tactical level. Iran calculated that America did not have enough interceptors to stop every drone.
So I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he said, what's going on with the war? I'm seeing these reports on X that all these American ships and American cruisers and battleships and aircraft carriers have been sunk. And I said, that's nonsense. Not one single American ship, to the best of my knowledge, has been sunk. And when you just look at the military results so far, sure appears that the United States and Israel are winning the war. Now, on another framework, you can look at oil prices and say, oh, the United States and Israel are losing the war.
Enough missiles to sink every fast boat, enough ships to patrol every mile of coastline. And they were right. At the tactical level, the math was perfect. But America is not fighting at the tactical level. America is fighting at the industrial level. And industrial warfare has only one rule. The side that burns through stockpiles faster than it can rebuild them does not run out of courage. It runs out of weapons. This is not a new concept. In 1943, Germany built...
This strikes me as an elementary and profound and important point. Which side is going to run out of weapons first?
The best tank on Earth, the Tiger I, superior in every one-on-one engagement. But America did not try to out-engineer the Tiger. America outproduced it. 49,000 Shermans against 1,400 Tigers. Each Sherman was inferior, but the factories that built them never stopped running. The Tiger was a masterpiece. The Sherman was a production line. The production line won. Quality sets the ceiling. Quantity fills the battlefield. And when your factories are rubble, you have neither. Iran is firing. America is burning the factories. Run the equation.
That seems elementary. It seems definitive. It seems probative. Iran's factories are overwhelmingly rubble. Therefore, it seems elementary, my dear Watson, that Iran is going to run out of munitions first. I'm sure there's a good rejoinder to this point, but I can't think of it.
Over 400 ballistic missiles on day 1, 40 on day 10. More than 90% reduction in 10 days. That is not a ceasefire. That is a production line that no longer exists. Look at the map. Sharud, one of Iran's most critical missile complexes, responsible for producing the solid fuel rocket motors that power the K-Bar Shikan and the...
So the analysts on the side of the United States and America eventually winning this war, none of them, to the best of my knowledge, have pronounced definitively that America and Israel have won this war. Yet on the other side, it sure seems like it from following the mainstream news, that a majority of the serious analysts of this war have already concluded that the United States has lost this war. So what are the mental maps? What are the theories that predispose serious people to thinking that America has already lost this war? It seems to me that only through the force of ideology could you conclude right now that America has clearly lost this war. So given that none of the analysts on the side of launching this war have concluded that America or Israel has won, seems to me that they're far more realistic. And all the analysts who have definitively declared that America has already lost, it seems to me that they are stuck in some kind of ideology over reality framework that compels them to declare that this war is already a loser.
Fatah 1. Satellite imagery confirms extensive destruction. The solid fuel assembly line, the single most difficult component to manufacture in any ballistic missile program, is gone. Parchin, the military complex housing 2 to 3 solid propellant production facilities, destroyed. Kojir, on the outskirts of Tehran, the IRGC's primary center for developing surface-to-surface missile systems, hit. Here is the engineering reality. A ballistic missile is not one weapon. It is a convergence of 4 independent systems: solid fuel, a metal casing, a guidance package, and a transporter erector launcher. Remove any one of those 4 and the missile does not fly. You do not need to destroy all 4. You need to destroy the hardest one to replace. Solid rocket fuel requires specialized chemistry, controlled atmospheres, and production lines that take years to build. Sharud built those production lines. Sharud is now rubble. The replacement timeline is not months. It is years.
That strikes me as a definitive and telling point. So depending on the model that you're using, right, depending on the mental map, you're going to come out on different sides of winning and losing with regard to this war. So if you hold the nuclear proliferation model, then you're going to likely hold that America has already lost because the knowledge remains for Iran to build a nuclear weapon. You can't destroy the knowledge, and the intent will only increase and intensify and harden. So by that measure, by that mental map, the United States has already lost. Then there are the academic specialists who study the Middle East war, and they are not nationalists, right? They don't like thinking in terms of binary contests between states. They want to see this as a war between systems. And so if the United States and Israel strike Tehran, but Iran maintains relationships with Hezbollah and the Houthis and militias in Iraq, then Iran wins, because they will win just by virtue of surviving. Then there are military theorists and defense technologists, like the people who made these videos that I'm playing, Navy Decoded, and they treat the war as a laboratory. They track the cost exchange ratio, and so by their measures, right, the United States is winning. So each of these models defines the finish line differently, right? The model for a regime change looks different from the model with regard to the disappearance of the ruling elite. So some people are looking at this through the Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq template. And by that template, the United States has already lost, right? That template that says that air power has severe limits, and therefore the United States is automatically losing. Henry Kissinger says if the guerrilla doesn't fights on, right? If he just exists, then eventually the conventional armies will lose if they do not win definitively. But I'm going with this Navy Decoded model.
Here's Iran does not have. Over 400 on day 1, 40 on day 10. That is not a tactical adjustment. That is an extinction curve. Ballistic missiles. Equation. Solved. More than 700 drones on day 1, 60 on day 10. More than 90% decline. Same trajectory.
So the majority of the analysts say as long as the Iranian regime, Islamist regime, remains in power, then Iran wins.
Same cause. Shahed Aviation Industries in Isfahan.
So I don't find that definitive. Right? This may be like the Cold War. All right? It may take years for the Iranian Islamist regime to fall, but the more unattractive you make it to partner with the Islamist regime, right, the weaker it is, right? We all depend on coalitions. Group strategies outcompete individualist strategies. And so if you create more and more incentives to side against Iran, if you make it harder and harder to ally with Iran, that seems to me a dominant strategy akin to the Cold War. So if you simply degrade Iran so that people will be less likely to make alliances with Iran, then it would seem to me you're on a good trajectory, even if the overthrow of the Islamist regime takes another 10 years or 5 years.
The factory that manufactured the Shahed series drones Iran exported to Russia, launched against Israel, and deployed across the Gulf, hit. The warehouses, production halls, and drone storage facilities struck by the bomber force. Hess-A, the Iran Aircraft Manufacturing Industrial Company, also in Isfahan, targeted. The production infrastructure for Iran's cheapest and most widely deployed weapon is collapsing. A Shahed drone is not a complex weapon.
So I'm not an Iran expert and I'm not a war expert, but I know something about stories. I know something about the stories I tell myself. I know something about the BS stories other people manufacture. I know something about journalism cliches. And one cliche with this type of war is that the target bank is running out. Right, our targets in Iran, they're just fewer and fewer, that we're reaching our limits. This is a cliche, and you always hear it around the third or the fourth week of an air campaign, and I don't believe it's happening. I think that we got rid of certain targets. Other targets remain as problems pop up, such as the Strait of Hormuz. Then we will create new target banks. So the narrative, we're running out of places to bomb in Iran, that doesn't ring true to me. Here's another narrative cliche that doesn't ring true to me. The battle for the soul of Islam. Right? We need to encourage the moderate forces in Iran. Right? Number one, there's no essential Islam. There's no soul of Islam. Islam manifests itself differently in different contexts. Same with Judaism, same with Christianity. Number two, outsiders will not decide Islam, just as outsiders will not decide the trajectory of Christianity or Judaism or any other religion. Now, where this guy is touching on something that is true, it's true that everything we do affects other people. But what we do and how it affects other people is not sufficiently clear. It's not even knowable that we can then strategically plan as outsiders to reshape Islam. Yes, we all exist in relationship to one another, and we cannot be 100% indifferent to suffering elsewhere. But then to leap from that moral intuition to we have a strategic program for reshaping Islam just does not make sense, right? We cannot trace the full consequences of anything we do in our immediate lives, let alone at the scale of a civilization.
A PGS guidance unit, wings made of composite material. Iran designed it to be disposable, cheap enough to lose by the hundreds. Before this war, estimates placed Iranian production capacity at 200 to 300 drones per month. That was the math Iran was playing. Lose them faster than the enemy can shoot them down, and the enemy runs out of interceptors before you run out of drones. The math was correct, until the factories burned. You cannot produce 300 drones a month from a production hall that no longer has a roof. The supply chain for GPS modules and piston engines depended on imports that no longer arrive through ports blockaded by...
So I really like the YouTube channel, The Enforcer. They do about the best job I know for live coverage of war. But I really don't like the overstatement. So they headlined recent videos, the destruction of Kaj Island. Right, Kaj Island was not destroyed. Certain military targets on the island were destroyed. So I don't like how they're constantly making hyperbolic statements completely out of line with reality. I don't like the way they overhype. Right, these overstatements, they just destroy credibility.
By the 3-carrier siege we covered in a previous video. Iran's drone production was designed for peacetime output. Wartime destruction of the production base does not reduce output by half. It reduces output to near zero. Because a factory is not a single machine. It is...
Bob says, how strong is the argument that Russia ended the rules-based international order by invading Ukraine in 2014 and 2022? Or perhaps the Western wars in Afghanistan and Iraq 2001, 2003. Sure, so you could make various arguments of varying degrees of compelling nature when the international rule-based order broke down, but understanding it was always a fiction, and allegiance to the fiction will be strong as long as it serves the people in power. And as soon as the fiction no longer serves the people in power, it's going to break up. So it was always going to break up, just like the commitment to the free market in ideas. That was a dominant intellectual frame from, say, much of the 20th century, but it pretty much died out by the 1980s. One, it was always a fiction. And two, as soon as that fiction no longer served the people who controlled the intellectual means of production, then it was jettisoned. So when you had the rise of alternative media, then elites backed away from supporting a free market. So you can make strong arguments naming it 2001 when the United States invaded Afghanistan, or 2003 when it invaded Iraq, or even stronger 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, or 2022 the Ukraine war. All of those you can make strong arguments for, but it was always a fiction. And as soon as the fiction no longer served those with power, it's going to get jettisoned. So even if Donald Trump had never come along, the international rules-based order would have been exploded by now, just due to the incentive structure embedded in reality.
Is a convergence of tooling, workers, raw materials, and electricity. Remove any one, and the line goes dark. More than 700 on day 1, 60 on day 10. The factories are rubble. The supply chain is severed. The equation moves in one direction. And equations do not negotiate. This one is harder. And we will be honest about it. The IRGC operates more than 1,500 fast attack craft. Small, cheap, 50,000 to 5.
So it wouldn't surprise me, it wouldn't shock me if the Strait of Hormuz is not cleared up for another 2 months, which would mean a lot of economic pain, a dramatic rise in oil prices. But I would expect 2 months from now that the Strait will be clear. That's my read of things.
$500,000 each. Built from fiberglass hulls, outboard engines, and a single anti-ship missile, usually the NASR-1. They are manufactured in small boatyards scattered along Iran's coastline. You cannot destroy them the way you destroy a missile factory because there is no single factory. There are hundreds of sheds. This is the equation that has not been fully solved. Fast boats are simpler than ballistic missiles, cheaper than drones, and harder to eliminate through industrial strikes alone. Iran can keep building.
So I love the power of alliance theory. Alliance theory says that what we believe is basically a rationalization for whatever alliance or group that we want to belong to. So the arguments for Israel, for example, have changed during the age of Trump. So it used to be that the argument for Israel was that it was the sole functioning democracy in the Middle East, or that Israel shared our values, or Israel was our greatest ally. And in the age of Trump and the age of MAGA, the Zionist lobbies and think tanks start using very different language. Now it's about the war with Islam, national sovereignty. Israel is this plucky nation that's defending itself. It's about transactional interests. So arguments change. It used to be the Republican Party was all about free trade. Then during the age of Trump, it shifted to the beauty of tariffs. So theories are useful to the extent that they are predictive and explanatory. And alliance theory, which says that what we believe is primarily a function of who we want to belong to, I think is incredibly explanatory and predictive.
Hulls longer than it can keep building missiles.
Right. So I converted to Orthodox Judaism, and if I didn't find a home in Orthodox Judaism, if I didn't find friends in Orthodox Judaism, like some other people, they've technically, formally converted, but then they were not able to socially make a go of it. And so when you lose that social system around you, you're going to lose the beliefs that go with it. So if you don't have any friends in Orthodox Judaism, you're going to drop out of Orthodox Judaism. If you don't have any friends in any particular, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you're going to drop out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. A sociologist who was a friend of my family, and I grew up as Seventh-day Adventist, he did a study and found that if you don't have at least half a dozen friends in a particular church, you're highly likely to drop out.
But the hull is not the weapon. The weapon is the NASR-1 missile mounted on it. And the NASR-1 is manufactured at the same facilities in Isfahan and Parchin that are now wreckage. A fast boat without its missile is a fishing vessel with a machine gun. A fishing vessel with a machine gun does not close a strait. The same logic applies to the rest of Iran's expendable fleet. CENTCOM destroyed 16 dedicated mine-laying vessels, the small craft that seeded the strait with contact mines and bottom influence mines. But the ships were only the delivery system. The mines themselves come from storage facilities and production lines. General Kane confirmed that CENTCOM continues to hunt and strike mine storage facilities inside Iran. Without new mines being manufactured, without storage depots to reload from, and without mine-laying vessels to deliver them, the mines already in the water are the last mines Iran will ever deploy. Every one cleared is one that will never be replaced.
So when I watch news conferences, it's incredibly annoying how intricate, self-aggrandizing, and unnecessarily long the questions are. In my experience, and I've interviewed thousands of people, and I'm pretty good at it, usually the shorter the question, the better the question. So then you watch TV, you watch the press conference, and you have these lengthy addresses by usually the TV journalists. And it's so annoying and self-destructive because you just look like a total idiot. So why do people grandstand like this? And I think I know, right? There's a part of me that wants to dominate every class, every meeting, every situation. And so in second grade, as I mentioned, the teacher noted that Luke is always very eager to share his opinion with the class. And in high school, I had a journalism advisor who said I was the most challenging student he ever had. And then I love my political science classes. And the happier and the more confident I feel, then the more I talk. And so in political science class, I was always asking these long, lengthy, obnoxious questions. And teacher once gave me a B instead of an A because he just erupted at me in the middle of class because I was so presumptuous and annoying. And we maintained a friendship, or developed a friendship after that. And he once wrote to me, you've got a good mind, but you need to be very careful how you use it, or otherwise people will hurt you. And there was this woman who was not a big fan of mine in one of my international relations classes who said to me, I never understand what you're talking about, because I was just like showing off and being grandiose and incredibly obnoxious. I moved to Los Angeles in March of 1994, and I was going to all the Jewish events that I could. And at every event, I'd raise my hand and make some presumptuous, grandiose statement, question. And until this woman called me on it. She says, every event I go to, you're standing up, making these long soliloquies, trying to get attention, and it's annoying. And I heard that and go, yeah, she's right. It stung. It stung because she was right. And honestly, the only way I've learned to overcome that is just don't ask questions. So around 2007, I just overwhelmingly stopped asking questions in Torah classes. Because it was so ridiculous for me to think that I knew better than everyone else. And it's like eating chocolate. It's hard to just ask one. It's hard to just have that one chocolate. So my father would not eat chocolate because he found it easier to completely abstain from eating chocolate than to be moderate with eating chocolate. And I found it easier to completely abstain from asking questions as opposed to just being moderate with my questions.
And then there are the God-Deer-class midget submarines, over 20 hulls, designed for shallow water operations in the Strait. They carry torpedoes, the Val FAJR, and can also lay mines. But a submarine without torpedoes is 95 feet of steel with nothing to fire. The Parchin complex that manufactured torpedo components has been struck repeatedly. A God-Deer with empty tubes is just a hull hiding underwater. No weapon, no factory to reload from, no mission. Across the entire expendable fleet, the same equation applies. The weapons are
So do you have an inner prosecutor? Do you have like a grand inquisitor inside of you who wants to convince you that you're a piece of crap? I've often been overwhelmed by self-loathing throughout my life. There are years where I'd wake up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and go on Facebook to see if somebody had unfriended me. And the most effective way that I found for dealing with this self-hatred is to take the attitude that given who I was at a particular time, I could not have acted differently. So I am 59 years of age. And every day I have to deal with the consequences of my terrible choices in the past. And one of the more profound models that I've become aware of over the past few months is the model of path dependence. The decisions that you make in the past, right, they have a profound effect on what's going on for you right now. Also, nation states. The decisions that nation states make, right, put it on a path for war or prosperity or conflict. There have been moderates in America and there have been moderates in Islam who've tried to create some modus vivendi between Iran and America. But the path of enmity and fighting and hatred, which has existed in particular between the United States and Iran over the past 47 years, that path has been more powerful than all the attempts to moderate. And I've been thinking a lot about industrial policy and the selective use of tariffs to redirect the American economy so that it primarily fulfills the dignity and the needs of its citizens rather than just these abstract mathematized economic models. And I'm thinking about World War II, where the United States very quickly was able to shift from manufacturing consumer goods, such as cars, to building weapons. Because we had a large manufacturing base, we were able to switch that base fairly easily from making consumer goods to making weapons. Now we don't have that big industrial base. That makes us much more vulnerable because we took a certain free trade path that hollowed out our industrial manufacturing base. And now we have to live with those consequences. And once you make bad decisions in the past, it's really hard to turn things around, to sort them out. And I was just thinking on the individual level, I always bring things back to me. Right? I had this girlfriend who had wonderful attributes. And then she decided to get a reduction surgery. And so that woman who I loved is like gone forever. Right? Those attributes are gone. Right? Once she took that path. And then I started thinking, like, how do other people deal with their inner prosecutor if you have a grand inquisitor? So I suspect that, one, if you've lived a pretty good life, you don't have as much to be prosecuted for. Two, if you're busy, you don't have as much time or room in your psyche for the prosecutor to rear his ugly head. Three, you get a lot of therapy. Four, you do 12-step recovery work. you become a Christian, you believe that Jesus forgives you for your friends. I think those are the major ways you distract yourself, right? You live a life of service to others, right? I wonder what are the other methods that other people use to keep their inner prosecutor at bay. So I'm not arguing that this perspective is true. I'm arguing that it is useful for me. The perspective is, given who I was at each point in time, I could not have acted differently. That doesn't mean I'm morally off the hook. Doesn't mean that I don't owe amends to people. Doesn't mean that I don't need to clean up the wreckage of my past. But it does mean I don't have to beat myself down. It does mean, to me, I've reluctantly come to see the use of the 12-step model that when we were in the throes of our addiction, we were sick. And that way, if you understand yourself as being sick, you don't have to hate yourself. You still have to clean up the mess of the past. But for me, the attitude of, given who I was at the time, given the tools that I had at my disposal, then I could not have acted differently. Doesn't mean that sometimes I don't question the legitimacy of that. But overall, I'm not someone who's racked by regret. But overall, I think that approach works for me. It could be that I'm fooling myself. But, bro, I've got the peace that passeth understanding.
Manufactured in factories that no longer exist. The supply chain is strangled by the economic blockade, and CENTCOM is hunting the platforms themselves. Fast boats struck daily, mine layers sunk, submarine positions compromised. Run the swarm math. Iran needs 30 to 50 fast boats attacking simultaneously to overwhelm an EEG's combat system. If Iran loses 15 to 20 per week and can no longer arm the replacements, the swarm drops below the threshold of effectiveness within months. The mine layers are gone. The mine factories are struck. The Gadirs are running out of torpedoes. Not because every platform was destroyed, because the weapons that made them dangerous are gone. 1,500 ants, 20 submarines, 16 mine layers, already gone. But the anthill,
So Edward Dutton just made a live video. Which foxes are really behind the Iran war? And so I think the analysis that Bibi just mesmerized Donald Trump, Bibi manipulated Donald Trump, Bibi just fooled Donald Trump into an unnecessary war is just ridiculous because we did not evolve to be gullible with regard to our vital interests. That simple insight helps cut through a whole bunch of nonsense.
Missile factory, the torpedo plant, the mine depot is gone. Ants without weapons are just boats. Submarines without torpedoes are useless. Mine layers without mines are empty barges, and none of them close a strait. Now address the objection every viewer is thinking. 3 ships were still hit. Tankers are still burning. If America is winning...
And the chat says, Chabad loves this war. Well, Chabad is a Hasidic organization. People in Chabad are so busy trying to provide and protect their families, right? People in Chabad send all their kids to Jewish day schools. The amount of mental cognitive processing power that people in Chabad have for this war is quite low. So out of all the groups behind this war, right, Chabad would not rank in the top 100. The Orthodox Jewish way of life is an incredibly expensive way of life. It means you have to send your kids to a Jewish day school where the tuition runs typically between $20,000 and $60,000 a year. There's simply not time for thinking about things that don't directly affect your welfare.
In the industrial war, why are commercial vessels still taking damage in the Strait? Because those ships were not under American escort. They were not ordered through by CENTCOM. They entered the Strait on their own, despite warnings, despite IRGC threats.
And Bob asks, how wise is it to describe a lack of inhibition as a sickness? So let's take the wise criteria to mean effective. So if you don't describe it as a sickness, instead you describe it as a lack of inhibition, then you're going to feel bad about yourself. You're going to be much more likely to hate yourself. You're going to be much more likely to castigate yourself, and that doesn't make you more effective in life. And the more effective you are in life, the more likely you are to be of service to other people, the more pleasant you are to be around. People who hate themselves are not fun to be around, and people who hate themselves don't tend to be of much use to others. So if let's say your lack of inhibition led you to do terrible things when you were drunk or intoxicated, then if you just take a moral appraisal of your life, you'll have abundant reason to hate yourself. If you take the 12-step sickness model, then you recognize that you're in the grip of something greater than yourself when you did not have sufficient tools to deal with the stimuli in front of you, but now you have the tools, you can do better, and you have the ability to go back and, to whatever extent possible, start to make amends for the harm that you've done. So the moral criteria will predispose you to hate yourself and therefore be less functional. The medical criteria of seeing it as a sickness will enable you to make much more progress with your life and to spend less time castigating yourself. Now, that's just my experience, and that's just how I read things. I don't think there's one magic key for everyone on how to lead a life. I'm not sure that the medical model or the sickness model is of equal efficacy for people. I think some people, it's probably not a good fit, and they need some other way of coming to terms with the bad things that they've done in the past. Right? Maybe your faith in Jesus is what takes away that pain.
Threats, despite the fact that every intelligence agency on Earth had flagged that corridor as a kill zone. The United States Navy did not send those ships into Hormuz. Those shipping companies sent themselves.
Right. This is a key, elementary, commonsensical point. It wasn't the United States that sent these ships into Hormuz.
And that distinction matters.
Right. This is not part of us. This is something that outgroups have done.
Because it reveals the difference between patience and recklessness. The shipping companies looked at the oil price. They looked at the war risk premium, $250,000 per transit. They looked at the potential profit on a cargo of crude. And they did what impatient people do. They ran the numbers, liked the odds, and tried to push through before the equation was fully solved. They gambled. 3 of them lost. The United States Navy did not gamble. The United States Navy looked at the same strait. 6 nautical miles of usable corridor, mined by the IRGC, patrolled by God-tier-class midget submarines, prowled by fast boats, and made a different calculation. Not a calculation of profit, a calculation of physics. One mine under an A.R. Lee Burke, 89.5 million.
So I spent a lot of time listening to the best elite commentary on this war. I've noticed a whole bunch of verbal tics, and one of them is unpack. Elites just love the word unpack. And I find it annoying, so let me unpack it for you. Right? It's just classic elite speak. Right? It signals a kind of intellectual sophistication and seriousness without requiring any sophistication or seriousness. Right? It tells the audience this topic has hidden layers, and I am the person equipped to reveal them. Right? This is a claim for status. Right? Before you express any idea, comes out of therapy, culture, and academic jargon. Right? It shows the performance of careful thinking. Right? When therapists began using unpack in the 1980s, right, they meant they're going to examine piece by piece. And there's a time and a place where the word carries genuine value. Right? There is a time and a place when the use of the word unpack properly suggests patience, rigor, and emotional intelligence. But the way it's used by experts with regard to this war, it's condescending, right? It's implying that your audience only hears this news in a compressed, confusing form, and that you will now sort it through on their behalf. It positions the speaker above the material and above the listener, and elites love that. And it also is vague, allows the speaker to avoid committing to saying anything. It allows the speaker to avoid committing to a thesis. Right? Let me unpack that. Right? You can promise activity. You can promise rigor without actually doing any. Right? It's a word that carries with it motion. It sounds analytical, but you also get to keep all your options open. Right? The vagueness of unpack is the feature, and elites just love it. They love it almost as much as they love same-sex marriage and assisted suicide.
$1 million in repairs, and 10 sailors injured, 4 with severe burns evacuated to a military hospital in Germany. That is not a hypothetical. That is the USS Samuel B. Roberts in 1988. One $1,500 mine blew a hole through the hull, broke the keel, and flooded 2 compartments. That is not a budget number. That is a crew. One torpedo from a Gaudier, and we lose the ship. $2 billion, 300 sailors, for 1 transit. The shipping companies were hasty about solving the equation. We were not. Because we do not need to solve the equation inside the strait. We are solving it outside, at the source. While those cargo ships rushed through a corridor that was still dangerous, the bomber force was leveling the factories that produce the weapons, making that corridor dangerous. Every night, another assembly line goes dark. Every week, the stockpile shrinks. Every month, the threat inside the strait decreases, not because we cleared it with escorts, but because the enemy is running out of things to shoot. That is the difference between a trader and an engineer. A trader looks at today's risk and bets. An engineer looks at the trajectory of the equation and waits, because the equation is already moving in our direction. And here is the twist Iran did not calculate. Iran believed cheap weapons would always defeat expensive ones. At the tactical level, that was true. A $50,000 fast boat against a $2 million Tomahawk. But America did not fire Tomahawks at fast boats. America bolted a...
Right, this strikes me as common sense. It strikes me as valuable. It strikes me as about the best analysis on this war right now. So apparently 200,000 immigrant truck drivers will begin to lose their commercial driver's licenses. I think this is fantastic. Let's allow Americans to do these jobs. We don't need immigrants to do it. Too much winning, bro? No. More winning.
A $20,000 GPS guidance kit onto a $4,000 Mark 82 bomb and dropped it on the factories that built every weapon Iran owns. A $25,000 package, kit and bomb combined, erased decades of investment. Admiral Cooper said it plainly. Since the first 24 hours, Iranian missile and drone attacks have dropped drastically. He did not say Iran chose to stop. He said the attacks dropped. Iran is not exercising restraint. Iran is running out of things to shoot. If you now see factories instead of fast boats, subscribe to Navy Decoded and share this with someone who still thinks patience is weakness.
All right, excellent video. Navy Decoded. All right, here's their latest video.
On March 14th, open-source satellite trackers detected something running at high speed through the South China Sea. Not a carrier, not a destroyer. An amphibious assault ship. USS Tripoli, LHA-7. The ship most defense analysts had written off as a failed experiment. On her flight deck, up to 20 F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters. In her hull, 2,500 Marines. Destination, Hormuz. Here is why that is strange. We broke 90% of Iran's military equation. 60 warships sit on the bottom of the Gulf. The missile factories that fed Hormuz its teeth are rubble. Drone production lines, silent. 2 carrier strike groups hold the perimeter from opposite oceans. Lincoln commands the Arabian Sea, Ford locks down the Red Sea. A third carrier, the Bush, is still crossing the Atlantic, days away. From the outside, the siege looks complete, but Hormuz is still closed. So look at what complete actually means when you run the numbers. More than 150 tankers sit anchored outside the strait, hemorrhaging fuel costs while they wait. Brent crude holds above $100 a barrel because the market prices certainty, and right now, certainty does not exist. The remaining 10% of Iran's capability, mines seated across the seabed, mobile launchers buried inside mountain tunnels, fast attack craft staged in coastal coves.
So this video is going to explain what may happen next in this war.
Is enough to deny a 6 nautical mile shipping corridor. And here is the brutal arithmetic that keeps every escort commander awake. You do not need to sink a convoy to close a strait. You need to sink one tanker. One burning hull in that corridor, and no insurer on earth will write the next policy. The strait does not close by force, it closes by fear, and fear only needs one example. That is the paradox at the center of this war. The most powerful navy in human history solved 90% of the problem, but escort requires 100, and the distance between 90 and 100 is a supertanker on fire. Why is the Pentagon sending a ship most analysts dismissed to solve the problem 2 supercarriers could not?
So the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas recently died at age 97. He built up a whole bunch of elaborate theories much beloved by elites that justified elite power, including the power to limit what we can talk about. So for Jürgen Habermas, the topic of immigration should not be something that's publicly argued about. It should be left in the hands of experts to decide. It should be taken out of the realm of the political. So the liberal intelligentsia in Germany, the United States, throughout Europe, in Australia, they all believe that we need much more speech censorship and social media censorship than ordinary people believe. And what's the basis for that? Right? The basis is that ordinary people can't handle the truth. Ordinary people are not cognitively capable of grappling with difficult issues. Therefore, we need an elite to decide what is allowed to be talked about. And the prime example of this came in 2010 with the publication of the book Germany Abolishes Itself by Thilo Sarrazin. He argued for an immigration restrictionist perspective, and Jürgen Habermas would not engage with any of his empirical claims. He just moved immediately to expulsion. He says that this bloke, Thilo Sarrazin, he's outside the bounds of the permissible, and he's terrible, and we don't have to engage with anything he says. And so he just ruled him out on procedural grounds. And Habermas and his intellectual peers believe that we need a deliberative democracy where elites act as gatekeepers and elites decide what we can talk about. But if we did not evolve to be gullible with regard to our vital interests, we don't need this whole elite censorship industrial complex. And there's another powerful concept that explains this topic, and that is niche construction that grew out of evolutionary biology. So every form of life tries to change its niche to best suit its own interests. So beavers do this, earthworms do this, and intellectuals do this. People like Jürgen Habermas do this. They try to aggrandize themselves. Now, our plumbers do it, right? We all want more status, more power, more of the good things in life, and so we all try to create the niche around us that best serves our own interests. And so elites also try to construct their niche to get as much power and status and control as possible. So for elites, for people like Jürgen Habermas, these difficult, thorny problems of different groups have different gifts. And what are the problems that come with large amounts of immigration? These topics, these painful topics, were just too complicated for ordinary people to grapple with. And elites don't like majoritarianism because elites only can rule a divided society, because then they can make deals with various strata of society to retain their control. But a unified society will not be ruled by elites. That's why elites hate populism, because populism believes that wisdom resides with the people, and a people united do not need to be bossed around by elites. So Jürgen Habermas and his peers created a specific niche, a particular media environment, right? A specific post-war moral consensus that showed itself as incredibly brittle because it optimized so narrowly for such a narrow band of what you could talk about. And when the environment shifts, when reality shifts, right, the organisms that had been selected for could not process the new data, right? They could only defend their niche. And so it was this structural incapacity and the eventual collapse of this created niche that has seen the rise of populist nationalism. And when people realize that you've been manipulating them, when people realize that you've been lying to them, people don't tend to react moderately, right? They tend to react fiercely and angrily. And as people realize how much they've been lied to, manipulated, right, it creates this hatred of elite rule. And elites have held out for decades that ordinary people are just too cognitively vulnerable, just too easily manipulated, and too needy of expert supervision to protect them from propaganda and demagoguery. But propaganda and demagoguery does not shift people against their own vital interests. Right? That picture of people being gullible with regard to their own vital interests is a total fiction. And so if, as Hugo Mercier points out in his great book, Not Born Yesterday, the science of who we trust and what we believe, if we have evolved vigilance, if we have evolved a whole set of cognitive mechanisms that evaluate communication before we accept it, then we did not evolve to be gullible, and we're not nearly as credulous as the elite maintain, and we are better able to deal with free speech than the elites believe.
What can 2,500 Marines do that 50,000 sailors cannot? If you are proud of the men and women operating these machines, subscribe to Navy Decoded. We do not sell headlines. we solve equations. To answer that, we need to understand the weapon they are sending, a ship America built, hated, and nearly scrapped. Because the story of why it was called a mistake is the same story that explains why it might now be the answer. When the Navy designed the America-class Flight Zero, they made a decision that drew fire from Congress, Marine Corps generals, and defense analysts alike. They removed the well deck from the blueprint entirely. The well deck is the ballast-flooded chamber at the bottom of an amphibious ship. Every assault ship since World War II has carried one. It is how you launch LCAC hovercraft, how you deploy landing craft. It is the identity of an amphibious warship. Designing an amphib without a well
I did my research before I selected these videos, and according to Gemini, these videos are highly credible.
Deck is like engineering a cargo truck and forgetting the bed. The backlash was fierce enough to force the Navy's hand. Congress mandated the well deck be restored on the third hull, USS Bougainville, LHA-8. The first two, America, LHA-6, and Tripoli, LHA-7, were written off as failed experiments. Amphibious ships that forgot how to be amphibious. The defense press agreed. The ship was a mistake. But the Navy understood something the critics did not. The space the well deck used to occupy unlocked a doubled hangar bay, expanded aviation maintenance facilities, a fully equipped surgical hospital, and jet fuel storage that previous amphib designs could never accommodate. Tripoli did not lose the ability to put Marines ashore. Tripoli changed how it puts Marines ashore, from the sea surface to the air. And in return, it gained something no other amphibious ship on Earth possesses: the ability to operate 20 F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters simultaneously. Proven off the coast of California in April 2022, 16 jets from Marine Aircraft Group 13 and 4 from VMX-1 operating from her deck in a single surge evolution. 20 F-35Bs, nearly half the air wing of a $13 billion supercarrier, on a ship that costs $3.5 billion. The ship they called a mistake turned out to be the most dangerous pocket carrier afloat. Now here is why that mistake is exactly right for Hormuz. We explained in a previous video why carriers...
So I just saw the news today that there is a series of reports that suggest that the current Ayatollah of Iran is gay. And apparently Donald Trump has been laughing about this for days. And then I thought about, from the perspective of the elite Buffett identity, there's nothing funny here. Because from the elite Buffett perspective, what's most important in life is inside of us, and that we can strategically, autonomously decide what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, and we can strategically, autonomously plot out our path in life, including our sexual preference. So can you just even fathom for the elite, for the Buffett, there's nothing funny about a gay Ayatollah. I mean, to me, it's hilarious. But from the Buffett perspective, there's no humor there because there's no moral contradiction, right? The humor is in the violation of boundaries. But if sexual orientation is just part of the domain of private psychology, it's just part of a person's inner identity that sits behind the boundary between a person's inner life and his public life, then there's nothing to mock, there's nothing funny, there's no amusement, there's no discomfort. Humor is built on contradictions, right? It's built on the destruction of categories. So in the porous framework, hypocrisy about sexuality is funny. To have a religious authority who secretly violates the sacred law that he publicly enforces is dramatic, and it's a dramatic inversion of the moral order. And that kind of contradiction invites satire, because there are genuine metaphysical stakes. That the gap between one's public performance and one's private life feels like a tear in the fabric of things. But in the Buffett world, sexuality is not a cosmic category. It's just a personal choice. Donald Trump does not pretend to have that Buffett identity, right? He hears the story, he hears the rumor, and he immediately sees the joke. Now, what is funny for someone in a Buffett identity, right? Irony about systems and institutions, humor that is meta or self-referential, humor that is incongruous without victims, say observational humor about some kind of shared psychological experience such as Seinfeld. So here are some examples of humor for the Buffett crowd. I have a lot of growing up to do. I realized that the other day inside my fort. Well, Stephen Wright said, I have a map of the United States that is actual size. I spent last summer forwarding it. Right? The humor is entirely internal to its own logic. It just follows a premise to an absurd conclusion and stops there. Right? Jerry Seinfeld says, what's the deal with the lampshades? You buy a lamp, it comes with a shade. The shade's job is to block the light. Why do you want the light blocked? You've just bought a lamp. Right? The joke goes nowhere. It means nothing, and that's the point. Right? So the buff itself finds this kind of texture of ordinary experience just worthy of endless examination. The entire premise of the show The Office works this way. The comedy comes from the institutional absurdity and the gap between how people present themselves professionally and what they really are psychologically, right? No metaphysics required. It's just the mild horror of bureaucratic life observed closely. Well, think of the classic New Yorker cartoon. A dog sits at a computer. The caption reads, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Right? This is just a diagram of buffered self-consciousness. Identity is private, our public presentation is constructed, and the gap between the two is funny rather than shameful. And here's another joke for the buffered. The doctor says you need to stop masturbating. The man asks why. The doctor says, because I'm trying to examine you. Right? The humor comes entirely from the collision of institutional context and private behavior. It's a joke about categories. It's not a moral judgment. So the humor for the buffered requires internal incongruity, systems behaving oddly, the gap between our self-presentation and reality. None of them require believing in anything larger outside yourself.
Refused to enter the Persian Gulf. That 540 nautical mile bathtub Iran spent 40 years turning into a kill box. 100,000 tons of irreplaceable steel is too valuable to risk inside it. Tripoli displaces 44,000 tons. She is not irreplaceable the way Ford or Lincoln are. In the Pentagon's risk calculus, losing Tripoli is painful. Losing a carrier is catastrophic. Tripoli is expendable enough to get close and powerful enough to change the equation. And she brings something no carrier possesses, 2,500 Marines distributed across 5 ships. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit out of Okinawa, the only continuously forward-deployed MEU on the planet. They just completed exercise Iron Fist 26 with the Japanese Self-Defense Force, practicing island seizure, electronic warfare, and rapid amphibious assault from February 23rd through March 9th, 2 weeks before Hormuz called. Escorting the Tripoli, the E.E. Jais cruiser Robert Smalls, CG-62, the Arleigh Burke destroyer Rafael Peralta, DDG-115, and 2 San Antonio-class LPDs, New Orleans and San Diego, carrying the Marines and their equipment. There is a cost. Pulling Tripoli from Japan strips the Indo-Pacific of its only amphibious rapid reaction force. That is not a light decision. The Pentagon is withdrawing assets from one theater to solve another, and that tells you exactly how important Hormuz is to America right now. The ship they called a mistake is now running at high speed through the South China Sea toward the narrowest strait on Earth, and it carries something nobody has brought to Hormuz before. Not more missiles, but an entirely new dimension, the ground. Iran built beach defenses to stop landing craft from the sea.
So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't deploy some ground forces in this war. I have been doing a lot more blogging than vlogging of late. I just find it healthier. I'm just finding more fulfillment, pursuing ideas down to their essence. And one of the projects that I've been embarked on is mapping the various think tanks and Iran experts and military experts who are speaking out with regard to this conflict to see where they sit in alliance theory, what coalition they speak for, who their friends versus enemies are, and how they help their coalition coordinate, show loyalty, and fight the opposition. So I was just thinking today about the Israel Democracy Institute out of Israel, and it is all about putting forward stories regarding Israel as a great liberal democracy. Now, with the Gaza war and all the wars that Israel's been in the last few years, it's becoming harder and harder to make the case that Israel is some kind of great liberal democracy. So the people at this institute have a very difficult job in front of them. Now, there is a more Israeli nationalist institute. It's called the Kohelet Policy Forum. And the Institute for Israeli Democracy, it focuses on liberal institutionalism to try to maintain ties with Western partners. Kohelet is much more mobilizing a coalition built around nationalism and religious and traditional identity and free market. So this is the right-wing Israeli coalition. and it's in the ascendancy, right? Those institutions and think tanks and lobbying groups that primarily made the case that Israel is some beacon of liberal democracy in the Middle East, their status and power has gone down in the age of Trump. The age of Trump is the age of populist nationalism, and it's the nationalist part of the Zionist think tank lobbying group equation that is rising up. So you try to make the argument to MAGA that the United States should support Israel because Israel is a liberal democracy, that argument falls flat. But if you make the argument for Israel on the basis of transactional terms, if you make the argument for Israel on the basis that it's a plucky nationalist country that defends its own interests, then you get a much more receptive hearing.
Today saying Operation Epic Fury has all but taken the regime out.
This is a paper tiger that we're dealing with now. It wasn't a paper tiger 2 weeks ago. It's a paper tiger now.
And now the focus is on the Strait of Hormuz, with a big question there being, will other nations pitch in? President Trump says there's no question they should be helping out.
We strongly encourage other nations whose economies depend on the Strait far more than ours. You know, we get less than 1% of our oil from the Strait, and some countries get much more. Japan gets 95%. China gets 90%. Many of the Europeans get quite a bit. South Korea gets 35%. So we want them to come and help us with the Strait. Numerous countries have told me they're on the way. Some are very enthusiastic about it, and some aren't.
That's news. Meanwhile, U.S. forces have hammered thousands of Iranian military targets.
Since the beginning of the conflict, we've struck more than 7,000 targets across Iran, and these have been mostly commercial and military targets. We've achieved a 90% reduction in their ballistic missile launches and a 95% reduction in drone attacks. The missiles are trickling in now.
I much prefer the analysis here on Navy Decoded.
Tripoli has no landing craft. Its Marines come from the sky. Nobody knows exactly how CENTCOM will employ Tripoli. The orders are classified, and any channel that claims otherwise is guessing. But the capability is not classified, and Tripoli introduces 3 capabilities that did not exist at Hormuz before she sailed. Each one solves a piece of the 10% problem the carriers left behind. The problem. Lincoln and Ford operate in the open ocean outside the Persian Gulf, too valuable to risk inside the bathtub. That means no persistent air cover inside the Strait. A combat air patrol launched from Lincoln at 500 nautical miles has to fly for over an hour just to reach the shipping lanes. Time on station is measured in minutes before the jets need to turn back for fuel. That gap, the gap between takeoff and presence, is where Iranian drones find tankers. Tripoli solves this with physics. At 44,000 tons and $3.5 billion, she is expendable enough in the risk calculus to operate close to Hormuz. Her F-35Bs are Stüvel, short takeoff, vertical landing. No catapults needed. They launch from an 844-foot deck. Operating at 100 nautical miles instead of 500 changes one variable that changes everything. Time on station. Run the math. An F-35B launching from Lincoln at 500 nautical miles cruises at roughly 450 knots. That is over an hour of transit each way, 2 hours of fuel burned just getting to the fight and back. On a standard load, that leaves maybe 40 minutes of actual patrol time over the shipping lanes. 3 sorties per day per jet, and you still have gaps measured in hours. Now, run the same math from Tripoli at 100 miles. 13 minutes each way. Time on station triples. Gap between patrols shrinks to minutes instead of hours. And those minutes are the difference between an Iranian Mohajer 6 drone finding a tanker or an F-35B finding the drone first.
So Donald Trump found it hilarious that the Ayatollah might be gay. And I was wondering, how would other American presidents have reacted? Because I can't think of any other American president in the past 100 years who would have just laughed at this news. So I ran it through AI, and it suggested that Franklin Roosevelt would have found it useful and filed it away without laughing because he was a ruthless collector of personal information about rivals and allies. Eisenhower would likely have found it uncomfortable. He would have understood the information was a potential weapon. He would have passed it to the CIA to determine its operational value. John F. Kennedy would have smiled. Right? He had enough of his own sexual peccadillos that he might have appreciated the irony without moralizing about it. So he probably would have been the most likely of the other presidents to laugh. He probably would have asked McGeorge Bundy what they could do with the information, whether they could use it to split the Iranian leadership internally. Oh, I guess President Johnson would have been loud about it in private and disciplined about it in public. Right? He was famous for his crude humor and for using personal information about rivals mercilessly. So he would have made private jokes about it and then asked his national security team to weaponize it. Richard Nixon would probably been the most strategically serious about it and the most personally conflicted. He was personally deeply uncomfortable with homosexuality and would have reacted with genuine disgust. Then he would have thought carefully about how to use it to destabilize the enemy. Jimmy Carter would have been visibly uncomfortable. He would have thought it was perhaps unethical to use a man's private life as a weapon. He would have asked his advisors whether it was consistent with American values to use this information. Probably would have frustrated his national security team by insisting that we have to think this through morally before acting on it strategically. Ronald Reagan would have deflected it with a gentle joke. His public persona was all about optimism and avoiding anything squalid. George W. Bush, H.W. Bush would have been the most classical WASP. He would have briefly acknowledged it, made no visible reaction, and then immediately pivoted to what the intelligence community recommended doing with the information. Now, Bill Clinton would have likely been the most curious. He probably would have spent 20 minutes asking about the source, the cultural context, the theological implications, before anyone could steer him back to the policy question. He also would have been acutely aware of the irony of another political leader being vulnerable because of private sexual behavior. George W. Bush would have been uncomfortable in a specifically evangelical Christian way. He probably would have looked to Dick Cheney, would have shown no reaction, and then to Condoleezza Rice, who would have framed it as a question of regional stability, and Bush would likely have followed her lead. Barack Obama would probably have had the most complex reaction, probably the most likely to have had gay experiences of all these different presidents. He was the most personally comfortable and at ease with gay people, and he would have had that loyally instinct of not reacting viscerally to raw information. He probably would have made some kind of thoughtful and measured response, and he would have been alert to the propaganda potential of the news. But Donald Trump likely would have had the most honest reaction. Right? He would just laugh before performing strategic calculations or moral deliberations. He finds it funny, and he says it's funny, and his transparency is consistent with what we know about how he processes information. Right? He immediately understood it as a status weapon rather than a piece of intelligence that requires careful handling. He had the humor of recognition.
Tripoli's passive sensors detect surveillance drones before those drones transmit targeting coordinates back to shore launchers. Kill the drone, and you break the kill chain. We explained how that chain works in the previous video. Tripoli is the tool that severs it at the source. Tripoli solves the sky, but the Strait has 3 dimensions, and 2 of them are still Iran's. 3 fortified islands sit directly inside the shipping corridor, and no amount of air patrol neutralizes a missile launcher buried in reinforced concrete. Iran controls Abu Musa, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb, seized in 1971. Iran fortified them with anti-ship missile batteries, coastal radar, artillery positions, and IRGC garrisons. They are unsinkable aircraft carriers, fixed platforms that can launch ordnance into the shipping lanes at point-blank range. Even after Epic Fury's air campaign, any surviving capability on those islands threatens every vessel transiting the corridor. This is the scenario Tripoli was optimized for, and this is where removing the well deck becomes an advantage, not a liability. A conventional amphibious ship would have to push landing craft through those same mined waters to reach the island. Tripoli does not. Marines insert by vertical envelopment, MV-22 Ospreys and CH-53 helicopters, not landing craft. They fly over the minefields instead of sailing through them. They do not touch the water Iran spent decades preparing.
Now, let's imagine that Iran's Ayatollah comes out with a public pronouncement that he is gay, how would the elite news media cover it, right? They'd first frame it as a breaking news crisis, then they'd frame it as a legitimacy story, they'd frame it about instability and succession. Is this a sign of regime collapse? What does the clerical establishment do now? They then quote Thomas Wright from Brookings or someone else from a prestigious think tank about how this represents a historic fracturing of the Islamic Republic's ideological foundations. The tone would be grave and analytical. CNN would do a split screen. On one side, they'd have some national security analysts explaining the theological implications. Then the other side would be an Iranian dissident in London describing what this means for LGBTQ Iranians who've been executed under the system he now leads. The Chiron would say something like, Iran's supreme leader stuns the world, and then the panel would talk about it for 4 hours. Tucker Carlson would say it was a CIA operation. And the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and Commentary magazine would argue this proves that the Iranian Islamist regime is in terminal collapse, and the United States must press its military advantage before the power vacuum fills with something worse. The nationalist realist camp around Elbridge Colby would say this regime is internally chaotic, it's destabilized, we no longer need to keep bombing it, let's just get out, declare victory. The supreme leader comes out as gay. That's proof that the war has already broken the regime's coherence.
To deny. Strike teams neutralize missile launchers and radar installations, extract whatever intelligence they can carry, and withdraw to the ship before the garrison can mount a counter. No permanent occupation, just a position that no longer shoots at tankers. The precedent exists. Operation Praying Mantis, 1988. Marines from USS Trenton boarded and destroyed Iranian oil platforms in the Persian Gulf in a single day. The 31st MEU trains for exactly this kind of operation. The honest caveat, raiding a fortified island is high risk. The current state of Iranian defenses on these islands after 2 weeks of airstrikes remains unclear. This is the lowest probability scenario, but the highest impact one, and it is now on the table. But here is what matters. The fact that a raid is possible forces Iran to garrison those islands, and every IRGC soldier defending an island is one not defending the coastline. Raids solve islands. But the Strait is not only islands.
So what if we had a Middle East version of the HBO show Heated Rivalry? So what if we had a chief rabbi from Israel also coming out as gay, and together these gay rabbis and gay imams, together they create a gentrification movement throughout the Middle East. Wouldn't that be marvelous?
Islands. It is also 6 nautical miles of open water that no warship can safely enter. So the question becomes larger. How do you control a corridor without putting a ship inside it? The concept is called Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, the central idea behind the Marine Corps' Force Design 2030 overhaul, the most radical restructuring of the Marines since World War II. It has never been tested in combat. Hormuz may be the first. Here is how it works. Marines fly ashore to small islands, uninhabited coastline, or Allied territory in Oman or the UAE. They establish temporary bases, HIMARS launchers, radar arrays, and forward arming and refueling points where F-35Bs and Ospreys can land, rearm, and relaunch without returning to the ship.
I would have done so much better in school. I would have been so much more passionate and excited about school if only they had classes in military history or military strategy.
Because they don't have too many missiles left.
That's huge progress. Central Command says this is about far more than just eliminating the immediate threat.
This past Friday.
So this is the Will Cain show, but with a different host. I think of all of Fox's daily TV hosts, Will Cain was the most skeptical of this war.
U.S. forces executed a large-scale precision strike on Karg Island, destroying more than 90 Iranian military targets, including storage bunkers for naval mines and missiles and other military infrastructure. It's one thing to defend by striking launchers and intercepting missiles and drones, but it's another thing to eliminate the wider manufacturing apparatus behind them. And we are doing that today.
CENTCOM not only explaining the concept here, but showing the reality of it, too.
Here you see a photo from March 1st of a naval drone storage facility located near the Strait of Hormuz. This is the same location 8 days later, completely destroyed. Next, here's a photo taken of an attack drone production factory in Tehran on March 5th. Here's that same factory 6 days later after a devastating barrage of U.S. airstrikes. And finally, the Yazdi military depot, pictured here last month. These 8 buildings are part of the IRGC's missile command infrastructure and are used to produce light and heavyweight torpedoes. Now, here's that same military depot just last week, or what's left of it.
I want you to compare that clarity, that transparency, that success with so much of the coverage that we've seen in the media of this operation. It really is striking. As for the regime itself, its remaining mouthpieces are sticking to their false story. They say they're not attacking their neighbors, they are just attacking American assets that happen to be in that area.
So what can we do? We just sit and watch that American forces are attacking us from their soil?
But your drones are going into civilian areas and hitting plants and hotels and civilians.
No, this is not the fact. We are only targeting American assets, American installations, American military bases. Everything belongs to Americans. And this is a fact that they are using their soil.
It's not a fact. It's a lie. Meanwhile, here at home, this was the scene on Friday, right here in New York City. Protesters storming into the streets to make it very clearly known they openly support Hamas and Hezbollah, both designated terror organizations. A little less clear as we look at the broader picture.
I think it'd be pretty cool if we could simply deport those guys chanting for Hamas and Hezbollah.
What this creates, a kill zone spanning the entire width of the Strait. HIMARS firing ATACMS at 162 nautical miles or PRSM at 270 nautical miles can engage any fast attack craft, submarine, or mine-laying vessel that enters the shipping corridor. Anti-ship firepower from shore. Simultaneously, Marines provide security for the LCS mine countermeasure ships already operating in the area. Small boats screening against fast boat harassment. F-35Bs overhead creating a protective bubble. Mine clearance still takes weeks. But Tripoli accelerates the timeline by protecting the sweepers, instead of waiting for the sweeping to finish before escort begins. That rewrites the physics of Strait control. You no longer need warships inside the Strait to control the Strait. Marines on shore create a firepower bubble that is cheaper, harder to find, and impossible to sink. The precedent is not theoretical. HIMARS already sank Iranian warships during Epic Fury, firing from Bahrain. The 31st MEU just practiced a similar scenario during exercise Iron Fist 26. The honest caveat: EABO doctrine is new, untested at this scale. The logistics of sustaining forward bases under Iranian counterfire remain unproven. But the physics has already been proven. HIMARS reached Iranian warships from Bahrain. The doctrine is new, the weapon is not.
Here is a conversation between Dan Senor, Nadav, Eyal, and Amit Segal from Israel.
Ways in which you can pacify the energy market internationally. But we're recording this on Sunday. This evening, the future trade of oil will open again. A week ago, it opened. Oil in a matter of hours rose to almost $120 per barrel. And then the administration said a few things, and it dropped. It dropped substantially.
Yeah, it went down like $40 a barrel.
Yeah, until Monday noon, I think.
Yeah, I'm just saying when the administration did that first round of messaging, and then it came back up.
And the messaging was basically giving an impression to the market, which I don't know if it's true, Dan. The impression that the market got was that this is going to end quite soon. Now, this is the impression of the market. I'm not saying that this is the intention of the president. And I'm not saying that this is the case. But this is what the market was reading into this. So this is becoming a huge political story in the U.S. even more than on day one, I think, because of economy, because of energy. And it all
I agree with Mark Halperin. It really doesn't matter that much what the polls say right now, because if this war is a success, then it will be popular. And if this war is a failure, it will be unpopular. So polling it in the middle, I don't think really tells us that much. People love winners, they hate losers.
Also has or could have repercussions to the operational side. I'm going to stop with this. We can elaborate if you would want to.
Okay, Amit, before I come back to Nadav, because I want to drill down on a couple of those points you made. Anything to add?
So I have hard times believing that the administration had an...
So Nadav Eyal, who was previously speaking, he represents an internationalist, globalist perspective. He speaks about the globalist perspective for an internal Israeli audience. This is Amit Segal. He is a right-of-center Israeli journalist and commentator. He represents more of an Israeli nationalist perspective, and I side with him right now.
And thought it through regarding the Strait of Hormuz and...
So Nadav Eyal thinks that the Strait of Hormuz problem is very serious, very challenging, very dire situation, and Amit Segal and myself, right, we think that the Trump administration has a plan that may very well work.
The oil prices. Maybe I'm too much into conspiracy theories, but I think that when President Trump says I need or I want the help of other countries to actually accompany ships into this strait, it's not because the U.S. lacks the power to do so alone, but because he wants to do something bigger. I believe it was a strategic trap put in front of the Iranians, and if I'm right, so we'll see it in a few days.
What do you mean by a strategic trap?
That this is the excuse for President Trump to do more, to take more dramatic measures.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with that.
Iran spent 40 years and billions of dollars building an air defense network that should have taken weeks to dismantle. It lasted hours. Not the kind of wall you were imagining, a wall of electromagnetic energy. Bavar 373 batteries that can reach out and kill an aircraft at 160 nautical miles before the pilot even knows he has been targeted. Mirage 4 radars scanning 240 nautical miles of sky, tracking 300 contacts at once. S-300 systems supplied by Russia. Layer after layer of missiles designed to turn any corridor into a graveyard. On paper, punching through that wall should have taken weeks. The 1991 air campaign against Iraq lasted 38 days, and Iraq had less than half of what Iran built. And yet, Iran's wall collapsed in hours. Not because America had more bombs, not because American pilots were braver, because America understood something Iran did not, something that has nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with money, and everything to do with a principle so simple that Iran studied it for 40 years and still missed it. What you're about to hear is not a timeline. The exact minute-by-minute sequence is classified, and any channel that tells you otherwise is guessing. But the physics, the engineering that dictates why each weapon must fire before the next, that is not classified. That is not a guess. That is how machines work. If you are proud of these men and the machines they operate, type PROUD in the comments. Subscribe to Navy Decoded. Other channels tell you what happened. We show you how it works.
So I'm not a war expert, I'm not a military expert, but this channel seems to be relaying common sense, seems to be relaying highly credible information. I've put these transcripts through Gemini, and Gemini comes back with this is highly credible.
Works. Because the people who serve deserve an audience that understands the mission. To understand the principle Iran missed, you first have to understand the wall and why it was supposed to be unbreakable. Before we dismantle the sequence, we need to respect the wall. Iran did not build a simple air defense network. Iran built a system, and systems are harder to kill than weapons. Start with the crown jewel, the Bavar 373, often compared to Russia's S-400. Here's what that means if you are an American pilot flying toward Iran. The system's Mirage 4 search radar sees you at 240 nautical miles, roughly the distance from New York to Washington. While you are still that far out, the fire control radar has already locked on. The Siyad 4B interceptor launches. It reaches beyond 160 nautical miles and can kill at altitudes exceeding 100,000 feet, higher than a U-2 spy plane flies. You are dead before you cross the coast. That is what the Bavar was designed to do, and Iran did not stop there. Below the Bavar 373 umbrella sits the third Khordad, the Mersad, the rod, each covering a different altitude, a different frequency, a different engagement envelope. Overlapping fields of fire, redundant communications, hardened command posts buried under mountains. 40 years of preparation. 40 years of studying how America dismantled Iraq. 40 years of engineering a system specifically designed to deny American aircraft access to Iranian airspace. Respect that. Because if you do not understand the strength of what fell, you will never understand the elegance of how it was broken. The sequence that broke Iran's air defense followed 4 phases. Each one created the conditions for the next. Reverse any 2 steps and the wall holds. Skip 1 and the whole chain fails. So how did we sequence it? In military doctrine, phase 0 is the shaping phase, operations that happen before the first shot is fired. It is not phase 1 because it is not combat. It is what makes combat possible. Before the first missile left a launch cell, something invisible crossed into Iran's digital infrastructure. U.S. Cyber Command and Space Command were what the Pentagon later called the first movers, layering non-kinetic effects before a single warhead flew. The details are classified. We do not know the attack vectors. We do not know the specific malware, if any was used. And we do not need to, because knowing the method changes nothing about the physics that follows. What we know is the result. NetBlocks, the independent internet monitoring organization, confirmed that Iran's national connectivity collapsed to 4% of normal levels. Whether that blackout was triggered by American cyber weapons or deliberately cut by the Iranian regime as a defensive measure, the effect was identical. Command lost signal. Cut the nerves, not the muscles. The radars were still standing. The missile batteries were still loaded. The commanders were still at their posts. But nobody could coordinate with anybody. A battery commander watching contacts on his radar had no way to confirm whether they were hostile, friendly, or decoys, because the communications link to his sector command was gone. He could see, he could shoot, he could not ask anyone whether he should. An air defense network without communications is not a network. It is a collection of isolated batteries, each making decisions alone. Iran's fighter jets, aging F-14s, MiG-29s, Su-24s, never left the ground. Without communications, no scramble order reached the pilots. Without functioning runways, no scramble order mattered. Here is where the engineering becomes elegant. While Phase 0 was still settling over Iran's communications, something crossed into Iranian airspace. Not a missile, not a fighter jet, something far cheaper. Lucas drones, low-cost, unmanned combat attack systems manufactured by SpectreWorks in Mesa, Arizona. Reverse-engineered from captured Iranian Shahed 136 one-way attack drones, Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of CENTCOM, later described the process with a sentence that belongs in an engineering textbook.
I'd like to point out these drones were originally an Iranian design. We took them back to America, made them better, and fired them right back at Iran.
Each Lucas drone cost $35,000, wingspan of 8 feet, total weight roughly 180 pounds, range 500 miles. Now do the math. A Bavar 373 interceptor, the Sayyad 4B, costs between $1 and $3 million per round. When a Lucas drone appears on the Bavar operator's scope, he sees a slow-moving contact pushing inland at barely 100 knots. He cannot tell whether it carries a 40-pound warhead aimed at his radar antenna or whether it is a decoy. Training says fire, so he fires. $1 million chases a drone cheaper than a pickup truck. He fires again, another $1 million. Every interceptor that kills a Lucas is one fewer in the magazine when the real targets arrive. But the cost exchange is not the trap. The trap is physics. Every time that Bavar battery fires, its tracking radar switches to full-power continuous emission. It must. The missile needs guidance. And the moment it transmits at full power, every passive sensor on the F-35Cs crossing the border receives that emission like a lighthouse in the dark. The battery is spending its ammunition and painting a target on its own position. Shoot the drone, drain your magazine, and reveal your position. Ignore the drone, it flies into your radar antenna. There is no correct answer. That is the definition of a trap. That battery commander staring at his scope, the one we talked about in Phase 0, the one with no communications, he has trained for this moment for years. He fires at the drone. He fires again. Every interceptor he burns follows the same playbook. Detect, track, fire, guide. The playbook is correct, but every shot he takes is the last step in an equation designed so that his correct response is also his fatal one. Everything until now was preparation. But ask yourself, what good is a drained magazine and a blinded commander if the radar itself is still tracking? What happens next takes less than 90 seconds. and it is the reason Iran's 40-year investment became worthless. Planners have a name for it. They call it the dilemma, because it offers the defender no correct response. The F-35C Lightning II, the carrier-based variant, launched from the flight deck of USS Abraham Lincoln, carries an estimated radar cross-section of approximately 0.005 square meters, roughly the size of a golf ball. That number is classified. Independent analysts derived it from observable geometry and material estimates. But even the conservative end of the estimate is devastating. Imagine asking a radar designed to track fighter jets to instead find a golf ball moving at 600 knots. Here's the engineering. Radar detection range does not shrink proportionally when the target gets smaller. It follows the fourth route, which means if you cut the radar cross-section by a factor of 10,000, the detection range only drops by a factor of 10. Sounds abstract, so put it in real numbers. The Bavar 373's Meiraj 4 radar can detect a conventional fighter, something like an FA-18, at 240 nautical miles. Against the F-35, independent analysis based on Iran's own test data estimates detection at roughly 50 nautical miles. Let that sink in. A radar designed to see 240 nautical miles sees the F-35 at 50. Now look at the Bavar 373's engagement range, 160 nautical miles. The radar that is supposed to give the system 160 miles of kill zone only sees the F-35 when the F-35 is already inside the engagement envelope. The kill chain runs backwards. The prey detects the hunter before the hunter detects the prey. And the F-35C is not even transmitting. Its ANASQ-239 electronic warfare suite operates passively, listening for every radar emission across the spectrum, geolocating each one with precision, and forwarding those coordinates via Link 16 without ever giving away its own position. Behind the F-35C, the EA-18G Growler, the Navy's dedicated electronic warfare aircraft, carries the AN/ALQ-249 next-generation jammer, AESA arrays powered by an independent ram air turbine. When the Growler locks onto a Bavar 373 tracking frequency, it broadcasts enough electronic noise to saturate the receiver. The radar operator's screen does not show clutter. It shows white, nothing. The radar is technically on, but functionally blind. And then comes the weapon that makes the dilemma permanent, the AGM-88G, AARGMER, Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile, Extended Range. Built by Northrop Grumman, speed exceeding Mach 2, range approximately 160 nautical miles, double its predecessor. Launched from FA-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers operating from the carrier deck. 3 seekers in 1 nose cone, and this is what makes it inescapable. Passive radar homing that follows the beam, GPS-assisted inertial navigation that remembers the target's position, and an active millimeter wave radar for terminal guidance. This missile does not care if the radar shuts down. Radar on, the AARGMER homes on the emission and flies down the beam at Mach 2. The operator has less than 90 seconds between transmission and impact. Radar off, the missile switches to GPS, navigating to the last known coordinates. At terminal range, the millimeter wave seeker activates and locates the physical hardware. The radar truck, the antenna array, the command vehicle. Turn it on, you die by the missile that follows the beam. Turn it off, you die by the missile that remembers where you were. A U.S. official later confirmed what the physics already guaranteed. We have effectively suppressed their air defenses. The door is open. So what do we...
All right, powerful explanation there from the Navy Decoded channel. How to think about how this war ends. Thoughtful article from March 13th here by Michael Oren.
How this war ends. Critics think the war with Iran is like Afghanistan. It's much more like the Cold War. By Michael Oren. Everybody knows how wars begin, but nobody knows how they end. In the last couple of weeks, the question of how the United States and Israel can conclude their war with Iran has become the most frequently asked by far whenever I appear on TV. My answer is not always one that the anchors like to hear. Responding to this question requires first addressing President Donald Trump's Protean war goals. These range daily from merely destroying what remains of the Iranian Navy and nuclear facilities to also stopping Iran's production of long-range missiles and its support for terror proxies, and aspirationally, achieving regime change. There is practically nothing left to target in Iran. Can continue. The means for achieving this victory are identical for Iran and its proxies. Put pressure on the U.S. to stop the war. Hamas did so by hiding behind Palestinian civilians so that Israel would kill large numbers of them and fuel international demands for a ceasefire. The Ayatollahs know that the world cares far less about Iranian casualties than it does about oil prices, and so they attack their energy-producing neighbors. The effect on global sentiment is the same. Economist Paul Krugman recently said that higher oil prices could be the straw that breaks the camel's back of the U.S. economy and will only get worse if the war continues. According to its definition of victory, Iran won last summer's Rising Lion Midnight Hammer War despite the damage inflicted by the U.S. and Israel. For 12 days, the Islamic Republic stood up to the world's mightiest superpower and its most effective and highly armed ally and never surrendered. Then, by fire.
So, according to the dominant analysts that you're hearing in the mainstream media, this war will be a failure and a defeat for the United States if it doesn't accomplish immediate regime change. But what if the United States simply weakens the existing regime so that it'll fall 6 months or 6 years down the road?
Firing a few performative rockets at Qatar, Iran forced Trump to agree to a ceasefire and compel Israel to comply as well. By the same criteria, Iran has reason to believe it is winning this war, too. Rather than buckling, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian recently set out conditions for America's surrender, including the recognition of Iran's rights to enrich uranium, the payment of war reparations, and a commitment to never attack Iran again. Should the war end now, much of the Middle East would once again fall into Tehran's sphere of influence. Confident that future American presidents will not renew major operations against it, the regime can resume its manufacture of ballistic missiles and reconstruct its nuclear facilities. The Strait of Hormuz will become an exclusively Iranian-controlled channel while terrorist attacks multiply across the Western world. The Gulf states, already afraid to alienate Iran by retaliating for its rocket and drone attacks against them, will rush to pay homage to the Islamic Republic. The people of Iran will be subject to unending and increasingly violent oppression. The international balance of power will also be skewed, with Russia and China reaching dangerous conclusions about America's staying power. To avoid that catastrophic scenario, the United States and Israel must deny Iran a victory by any definition. They must continue their intense bombing campaign to destroy Iran's ability to produce, store, and launch missiles and drones. They must clear the Strait of Hormuz of Iranian mines so that oil freighters can be safely escorted through its waters. Once defanged, Iran can be sealed by a hermetic naval blockade that will prevent the export of a single drop of oil and the entry of all but essential foodstuffs and medicines. Every effort should be made to ease the suffering of the civilian population while facilitating their ability to resist and perhaps overthrow the regime. It may take several years, but the Islamic Republic will fall. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed because outside pressure forced it to collapse in on itself.
I think that's a scenario that makes sense. Right, how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, there are methods, there are ways, but they are not quick.
How to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The good news, the crucial waterway can be reopened through military means. The bad news, it will take weeks or more. By Aaron McLean. The Iranians have now effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, and President Donald Trump faces an important decision about whether to force its opening. Declaring victory and walking away now would leave the strategic initiative to control traffic in the strait in the hands of the Iranians, who show no particular appetite to allow commercial traffic through at the moment. The personnel themselves and so forth. All of these kinds of targets would need to be hit and hit again until they can no longer be useful to the fight. Phase 2, the escort operation itself, would begin once it is thought that Iran's stockpiles of ship killers have been reduced to a manageable level. What's manageable? If one were to attempt to sail through the Strait right now, even under U.S. naval escort, the Iranians could potentially swarm convoys with enough projectiles that eventually something gets through, possibly even damaging the naval escorts themselves. A failure like this could harm confidence in the operation, to say the least, and set everything back weeks. The Navy will want to be in a position where Iran's capability to strike will be limited enough that our capacity to intercept will be able to handle the incoming. Interception of incoming fire will be only part of the tactical puzzle. The hard military reality is that the ships under escort will effectively be bait as the U.S. Navy and the Iranians battle around them. Like a mother duck and her ducklings, naval escorts and commercial shipping will transit the Strait under layers of air cover and persistent drone surveillance of the Iranian coast. When Iranian forces emerge to take a shot of any kind, our military will attempt to kill whoever is doing the shooting.
Right, and the YouTube channel Navy Decoded says some similar things about how the United States can control the Strait of Hormuz.
3 separate scenarios, but none of them matters in isolation. Stack them together, and something emerges that Iran has never faced and has no playbook to counter. This is not about adding more firepower to a problem firepower already failed to solve. It is about adding a dimension that did not exist in this theater until Tripoli sailed. For 40 years, Iran only prepared to counter threats from the sea, American warships on the horizon. Iran mastered that equation: mines below the waterline, cruise missiles from shore batteries, fast attack craft swarming in the shallow. Every dollar, every doctrine, every fortification was built to make the Gulf too expensive for ships to enter. The first 2 weeks of epic fury added a threat from the sky. Carrier air wings dismantled air defenses, flattened factories, crippled military infrastructure. But aircraft fly sorties and return to base. They do not stay. When Tripoli arrives, the equation gains a threat from the ground. Marines can appear on any island, any coastline, any Allied position along the Strait. And Marines stay. That is the dimension Iran never built defenses against. Iran built coastal defenses against ships entering the Strait, mines, shore-based missiles, fast attack swarms. Iran built air defenses against aircraft bombing from above. Those defenses are now crippled. Iran built beach defenses to stop landing craft from the sea. Tripoli has no landing craft. Its Marines come from the sky. Now look at it from Tehran's side. Defend the islands against Marine raids, and the coastline lies open to Ebo. Fortify the coastline, and the islands fall. Disperse across all positions, and there is not enough left at any single point to stop anything. 3 responses, 3 failures. The equation has no correct answer, because Iran built defenses against ships and aircraft, not against Marines who arrived by helicopter onto positions that were never supposed to be contested. That variable has never existed in Iran's coastal defense equation, and Iran cannot build a counter for it in weeks, not when its factories are rubble and its air defenses are silent. Be honest about what this does not mean. It does not mean Hormuz opens tomorrow. Mine clearance still takes time. Escort still carries risk. But Tripoli shifts the timeline from months to weeks. And more importantly, it shifts the initiative. Before Tripoli, we waited for the equation to solve itself, grinding Iran down through naval siege while oil markets bled. After Tripoli, we solve it, actively, from multiple dimensions simultaneously. If this video changed how you look at an amphibious assault...
Okay, that scenario makes sense combined with the article, the idea that perhaps in a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, we might be able to have a handle on the Strait of Hormuz and start opening it up. That seems reasonable to me. I didn't have strong opinions on the Pentagon versus Anthropic debate until I read the following article.
Anthropic doesn't decide our military's rules of engagement. Tech companies should focus on protecting our soldiers, not fighting the Pentagon. By Ben Van Roo. In one weekend, the U.S. used Anthropic's AI to fight a war and blacklisted it from any further government work. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has borne the brunt of the blame for starting a conflict between the military and the leading-edge AI developer. Really, though, this fight started when Anthropic demanded the right to set the terms on which the military would use its technology. That's not a confrontation that a private company should be getting into.
Okay, once I heard this particular argument, I thought, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Distance as virtue. If you can't dictate all the rules, then treat engagement as contamination. Since the start of the Anthropic Pentagon blow-up, 1,000 employees at Google and OpenAI have signed a letter called "We Will Not Be Divided." The letter suggests that the steps that the Defense Department took to punish Anthropic are part of a calculated strategy to get tech companies, especially Google and OpenAI, to compromise on ethical red lines. They're trying to divide each company with fear that the other will give in, the letter declared, urging staff at both companies to hold the...
So remember, there were no elite objections, and there were no tech objections to using AI to aid Ukraine, right? When it comes to Ukraine, right, the tech elite are all down with using maximum AI, but if America wants to use AI to further its own interests, then, now they've got a moral problem. So A-OK for Ukraine to use max AI, but very concerning for America to use max AI.
The line and make no compromises with the military. That letter circulated while American service members were taking casualties in the Gulf, while Iranian missiles hit U.S. bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar, while embassies closed across the region. Just as with Anthropic's demands to the Pentagon, what's at stake in the not divided letter isn't really the specific terms of the deal. Underlying the letter is a deep Silicon Valley distrust of the military's role in protecting the country. In 2018, Google walked away from a key AI contract, Project Maven, under employee pressure. I was furious at the double standard then. Social media and crypto were reshaping society in ways that dwarfed anything Maven touched, and nobody organized walkouts over that. But the dispute now is much bigger than Maven. That involved important software used in targeting drones. What's at stake now, though, is not just a small set of uses. It's the transformation of warfare. These kinds of objections were not raised when Ukraine started using AI in its war against Russia. Ukraine fields thousands of AI-guided autonomous drones. It deploys swarms that coordinate strikes with minimal human oversight. Western companies ship AI-equipped munitions directly to the front, and the tech community calls it democratic resilience. I agree, it is. But you don't get to celebrate the triumph of AI-aided warfare when it protects Ukrainians, and then sign a petition when the same technology might keep American troops alive in the Persian Gulf.
That seems to me absolutely unassailable logic, as does this video very strongly.
We send through it. And why did we wait 40 minutes to get here? Here is the detail that ties the entire sequence together, the piece of engineering that makes every phase before it make sense. 40 minutes ago, before the first Lucas drone crossed into Iranian airspace, before the F-35C listened for its first radar emission, before the Growler broadcast a single watt of noise, Tomahawk cruise missiles had already launched from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Gulf. CENTCOM photographs confirm it. The USS Spruance, VLS cells open, Tomahawks climbing into the night. Block 5 Tomahawks, $2.5 million each, Mach 0.74, range exceeding 1,000 miles. But Mach 0.74 is subsonic. A Tomahawk crossing the Persian Gulf needs roughly 40 minutes to reach the Iranian coast. The slowest weapon launched first, because it needed the longest runway. Every phase you just watched was designed to happen inside that 40-minute window. Phase 0 blinded the command. Phase 1 drained the interceptors. Phase 2 broke the radar. All of it, timed so that when the Tomahawks finally reach the coast, there is nothing left to stop them. The mathematics now compounds. The radars that would have detected our Tomahawks at 40 nautical miles are burning. The interceptors that would have engaged them are spent on $35,000 drones. The commanders who would have coordinated the response have not spoken to each other since Phase 0. Every phase removed one layer. By Phase 3, there are no layers left. IRGC naval bases along the Gulf Coast, command posts, fuel storage, submarine piers, hundreds of pre-planned targets, each selected months before the first Tomahawk left its tube. Behind the Tomahawks, our carrier air wing follows with two flavors of precision. The heavy, a 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAM that punches through the concrete arch of a fast attack boat shelter the way a fist goes through drywall. And the surgical, a 250-pound GBU-39 small-diameter bomb that glides 40 nautical miles from release, threading between buildings to kill a single missile battery without touching the warehouse next door.
Let's get a burst here from Fox News.
I really liked Greg's Harold Ford. That was really nice. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Dana. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. Coming up, Cuba feels the tightening grip of the U.S. energy blockade as an island-wide blackout hits that country after a weekend of rare and intense protests there. Plus, a massive winter storm and an East Coast severe weather system puts tens of millions of Americans under special advisories today. I'll speak with Ireland's Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, ahead of his St. Patrick's Day meeting with President Trump. But first, breaking tonight, President Trump says the U.S. military is hitting Iran hard near the Strait of Hormuz. The conflict is battling and rattling global energy markets and raising fresh fears about the security of the world's most important oil choke point. The president is urging allies to step up to help secure the strait. As for how long the operation may last, President Trump now says it'll be, quote, soon, and that the Iranian and U.S. officials are now in talks. President Trump is seeking to delay his planned China trip and meeting with leader Xi Jinping, which was scheduled for the end of this month. Senior White House correspondent.
Okay, keep an eye on the news. Thoughtful conversation here between Dan Senor, Nadav, Eyal, and Amit Segal.
Nadav, we can talk a little bit about where I think where the administration's heading, the politics of this, and what constraints or it puts on what the U.S. does. But before we do, can you just drill down a little bit on the specifics of some of these concerns in the area of energy that you were citing there, the hits on energy assets?
So Iran for many years has warned that if this and that happen, it will close the Strait of Hormuz. This was absolutely the scenario. I don't think, frankly, I do not agree with Amit that this is all part of a master plan. I'm not saying that the U.S. might try to open now the Strait of Hormuz forcefully. We have seen that the U.S. is deploying more than 2,500 Marines to the region. There is definitely discussion that I'm hearing about the possibility of taking some ground assets around the Strait of Hormuz. I'm hearing this from Israeli sources.
In order to secure the Strait of Hormuz.
In order to secure that. But I don't think everything was pre-planned, and here's why. What I'm hearing is that there's a lot of tension in the markets, and there's a lot of tension with those politicians that support this war. I'm talking about just reading what Lindsey Graham is saying, and he's probably the biggest supporter right now in the American Republican political sphere. It's obvious that there's something going on in that sense that wasn't completely pre-planned. Now, the Iranians have small speedboats, they've prepared mining, and they've shot at tankers. And basically right now it's closed. I just read an energy analyst explaining that the meaning of 20% is like the peak of COVID, if it lasts, if it's not a matter for 2 weeks. Now, what does it mean, the peak of COVID? It means that in COVID there was less demand, okay? And now there is no less demand. It's the same demand, but there's less supply. And that's the problem. Now, what they can do, for instance, and what's already happening, and it's just mesmerizing to see, Dan, you can see it virtually with satellite, is that oil tankers are turning to the Red Sea because Saudi Arabia was preparing for this moment, strategically speaking, because they knew that at a certain point the Iranians might do that. So they built a huge pipeline crossing the entire Saudi desert from east to west, And now you can see all these oil tankers, and they're churning from the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea to that point. Now, here's the problem. If you take that, and if you take a UAE depot that is beyond the Straits of Hormuz, geographically, and you take it together, it still compensates for about 30%. So that's one problem. Now, another problem is that the president has ordered a strike against Harg Island. Harg Island is 90% of the Iranian oil flowing from Harg Island.
So just for our listeners, in Hebrew, it's Harg Island, as Nadav is pronouncing it. In English, it's Karg Island. What is this island, and what is this operation?
90.
All right, let's get Fox News.
A missile launched by Iran exploded over Jerusalem's Old City earlier today. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is in Tel Aviv tonight with the latest. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Brendan. As you mentioned there, the attacks into Israel continue. A missile struck the northern town of Nahariya. A drone came into the north of Israel as well. Here in the central part of Israel, we had two missile attacks. 9 o'clock local time from our vantage point, we watched as a single interceptor raced across the sky and took the Iranian missile out. No injuries reported from today's attacks. A bomblet from a cluster bomb hit a residence in a Tel Aviv suburb today. No one was hurt because Israelis have become accustomed to missile warnings over the phones and retreating to bomb shelters. They've lived this way since 2003, but it does not mean they accept this routine as normal life.
Try to go out a little bit, like close to home, but it's been really crazy, and I'm scared.
You would have told me 16 days into the war there'd only be 13 American casualties and 13 Israeli casualties. I would have been shocked at such a low number.
I'm scared to go outside. I'm scared that I'll just get a siren in the middle of nowhere, and I'll have to look for a bomb shelter, and so it's scary.
It's tough for families with little kids who are living on the 6th floor. They got to run down to the shelter every night.
Can give a wrong impression because we're trying to keep life going on, but it's complicated. It's difficult. We are not sleeping well.
Israel's north is being tormented with rocket fire and drone attacks from Hezbollah. The Golan Heights have been hit from the north to the south, and everywhere north of the Sea of Galilee is at risk. There's reporting that as many as 450,000 Israeli reservists are being called up for an incursion into Lebanon to stop the rockets. The IDF confirms only that 120,000 reservists have already been activated. They will not comment on future operations. Meantime, in Australia, a fifth player with the Iranian women's soccer team has refused her claim or abandoned her claim for asylum, I should say. Only 2 Iranian women soccer players are refusing to return to their country. Brett.
Mike Tobin in Tel Aviv. Mike, thanks.
Okay, back to Nadav Eyal.
80% of the oil installations of Iran, refineries, everything is flowing through Harg Island. Now, here's the thing. Even now, after the strikes ordered by the president, the White House has made sure that everybody understands that this is not against any of the oil installations on this island. Now, it's very difficult. It's a very small island. It's a tiny island. To hit the military targets there without hitting the installations of Harg Island for oil. But the U.S. did that, and it also signaled that it's doing that. And I just saw a satellite from this morning. There are 3 tankers there, and they're uploading oil right now as we speak. For Iran, in terms of its lifeline, which is energy, it's not only business as usual because oil has risen any way you want to cut it down. It's risen substantially, even with its new rates. It's still risen substantially. Yeah. So they are actually getting more money right now, and this is the lifeline.
Meaning because the price of oil is up.
Now, why? Why wouldn't... So the Israelis always go, when I talk with the defense establishment in Israel, some go, we should bomb the oil refineries, just bomb the entire thing. I read a tweet by Lindsey Graham. It was saying to the Israelis, and I'm paraphrasing, you can't bomb.
Look, love is love. Maybe Lindsey Graham can reach out to the gay Ayatollah, and we can have a settlement based in radical love and inclusion.
The oil installations of Iran, because it's the future of Iran. And I would add to that, because if you do that, and oil rises substantially all around the world, then the war might need to be stopped anyway. So there is a question here. So what's the problem with what Amit just said? Amit made a pitch that, maybe you can just open the straits. Dan, you probably remember the tanker war in the 1980s with President Ronald Reagan. This thing might take time. That's the only point there. It could be brilliant. I do hope the president and the administration are preparing something. It can take time to open it because Iran was preparing for this. So there's really a dilemma here. One could hope that it will be solved in an optimal way, but it's definitely the main limitation on the war.
I think that as time passes, Iran becomes more and more similar to its proxies. It's very interesting because Iran, in the eyes of its leaders and its citizens and its people, is a well-respected country. But it's amazing to see how they act like Hamas and Hezbollah. One example, for instance, is the fact that the leaders of this regime, save, of course, the new Ayatollah Khamenei, were seen in public on Friday in this Al-Quds Day, Jerusalem Day, surrounded by citizens knowing that Israel will not kill them because of the rate of collateral damage. And the second thing is exactly what Nadav has just described, because Iran, unlike what it has said for the last 2 generations, cannot win a war. Now, 2 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, we were all under the impression that the war between Israel and Iran is going to be a war between equivalent forces. Now we see it's not the case, not only because the U.S. Army joined the battle. The same applied for the Rising Lion operation in June 2025. So they actually resort to this asymmetrical conflict. So whereas Hamas based its war on the sensitivity of the Western society to civilian casualties in Gaza and this sensitivity of the Israeli society to hostages, Iran now aims at the sensitivity of the American society to the energy prices, because they know that President Trump got elected first and foremost on the basis of skyrocketing inflation. So this is it. That's what they got. Now, I'm not saying it's not a crucial problem that should be solved. Then again, I believe that they thought about it, because it doesn't make any sense that they went on war without taking into consideration the number one strategic weapon of the Iranians, aka the oil prices. I do hope they took it into account. But I'm trying to say that's all they got. And we should take it into account when we look at the broader picture.
All right, let's leave it there. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.